Sometimes the biggest opportunities don't arrive wearing expensive suits. Sometimes they arrive disguised as someone everyone else ignores. When a struggling single father defended a disabled woman from an abusive man inside a crowded cafe, everyone thought he'd made a terrible mistake. No one realized the woman, quietly wiping away tears, owned the company that employed hundreds of people. And before the day was over, she would make him an offer no amount of money alone could explain. Before we continue, if stories about courage, kindness, and unforgettable justice are the kind you enjoy, take a second to subscribe. There are many more incredible stories waiting for you, and you won't want to miss the next one. Rain tapped softly against the cafe windows. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon rolls wrapped around the room like a blanket. People chatted over breakfast. A waitress laughed with an elderly couple. A college student typed furiously on a laptop. For everyone else, it was just another Tuesday morning. For Daniel Carter, it was a day that could determine whether he and his daughter still had a place to call home next month. 8-year-old Emma sat across from her father, carefully stirring a cup of hot chocolate that the waitress had quietly given her for free. "Dad?" Daniel looked up from the menu. "Yeah, sweetheart. Can we get pancakes today?" Her voice carried hope, not expectation. Daniel smiled. "I think we can make that happen." Emma beamed. She had no idea her father had only $23 left in his wallet. Rent was overdue. His truck needed repairs. The electric bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter because he already knew what it said. But none of that mattered right now. His daughter had smiled. For Daniel, that was worth more than breakfast. Their waitress, Mia, approached with a notepad. "The usual." Daniel chuckled. "If by usual you mean whatever fits the budget." She smiled kindly. "I'll see what the kitchen can do." After she walked away, Emma leaned forward. "I like her. So do I. She always smiles." Daniel nodded. The world needs more people like that. Across the cafe, near the large front window, a woman in a wheelchair quietly read through a folder filled with documents. She looked to be in her early 40s. Elegant, composed, her cream-colored blouse and navy blazer were simple but unmistakably expensive. Silver streaks ran through her blonde hair, giving her a quiet dignity rather than age. A leather briefcase rested beside her chair. Every few moments, she paused to massage her left hand as if it caused her constant pain. Most customers barely noticed her. Those who did assumed she was waiting for someone. She seemed perfectly content being left alone. Emma noticed her first. "Dad?" Daniel followed her gaze. "The lady." Emma nodded. "She looks lonely." Daniel smiled softly. "Maybe she's just enjoying some peace and quiet." Emma considered that. Maybe. Then she returned to coloring on the paper placemat the waitress had brought her. The bell above the cafe door suddenly rang. A man in an expensive camel-colored jacket stormed inside. His footsteps were fast, purposeful. He didn't stop at the counter. He didn't greet anyone. He walked straight toward the woman in the wheelchair. Daniel happened to glance up just as the man stopped beside her table. The woman's shoulders stiffened. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. "You ignored my calls." His voice wasn't loud. "Not yet." The woman calmly closed the folder. "We're in public, Victor." "I noticed." "Then lower your voice." Victor laughed bitterly. "No." Several nearby customers glanced over before returning to their meals. The woman sighed. "I told you my decision yesterday, and I told you you'd regret it." Daniel looked away. It wasn't his business. Arguments happened every day. He reached for his coffee. Emma quietly colored another flower. The cafe settled back into its normal rhythm. For a moment, it seemed the conversation might end there. Then Victor slammed both hands onto the table. Coffee splashed across the woman's paperwork. Heads turned instantly. "I built that company with you." His voice echoed through the cafe. "You don't get to push me out." The woman calmly reached for a napkin. "You didn't build it with me. I saved it after your mistakes nearly destroyed it." Victor's jaw tightened. "You think because you're sitting in that chair everyone should pity you." The words sliced through the room. Every conversation stopped. Emma looked up from her drawing. Her smile disappeared. Victor leaned closer. "You've been hiding behind that wheelchair for years." The woman's hands trembled, but her voice remained calm. "My disability has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this." He pointed toward her face. "You're weak. You always have been." The cafe fell completely silent. Customers looked at one another. Some frowned. Others stared into their coffee cups. One man reached for his phone, then quietly put it back in his pocket. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Emma tugged gently on her father's sleeve. "Dad?" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the scene across the room. He'd seen this look before, not on the woman's face, on his late wife's, the day strangers had mocked her, after chemotherapy left her too weak to stand. He remembered how helpless she'd looked. He remembered promising himself, never again. Victor suddenly grabbed the wheelchair handles. "You know what? If you're too stubborn to leave, I'll move you myself." The woman immediately gripped the armrests. "Don't." Victor ignored her. The wheelchair rolled backward. Its wheels struck another table, knocking over a coffee mug that shattered across the floor. Several customers gasped. Emma stood up. "Dad?" Daniel slowly placed his coffee cup on the table. His chair scraped quietly against the floor as he stood. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He simply looked at his daughter, then back at the frightened woman. Without saying a single word, Daniel began walking toward table 7. The cafe fell completely silent. Every eye followed the man walking toward table 7. Daniel Carter wasn't tall enough to intimidate anyone. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. There was nothing about him that suggested power or influence, just faded blue jeans, a worn brown jacket, and the tired face of a father who had spent too many nights wondering how he'd keep his daughter fed. Yet somehow, he was the only person moving. Victor heard the footsteps behind him. He turned just as Daniel stopped a few feet away. "What?" His voice dripped with annoyance. Daniel glanced first at the woman in the wheelchair, then at the shattered coffee mug beside her. Finally, he met Victor's eyes. "I think she's asked you to stop." Victor let out a sarcastic laugh. "And who exactly are you?" "Someone asking you to let go of the wheelchair." The cafe held its breath. Victor looked Daniel up and down. He smirked. "You know her?" "No. So this has nothing to do with you." Daniel nodded once. "It didn't." He looked toward the frightened woman. "It does now." Victor took one slow step closer. "You should sit back down." Daniel remained where he was. "I think you should leave." The words weren't loud. They weren't dramatic, but they carried the kind of calm confidence that couldn't be faked. Victor's smile disappeared. "You got a death wish." Daniel shrugged slightly. "No, I've just spent enough years teaching my daughter that if someone can't defend themselves, good people should." Across the room, Emma watched every second. Her little hands gripped the edge of the booth. Victor laughed. "You trying to play hero?" "No." "Then what are you doing?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Being the kind of man I hope my daughter becomes proud of." For the first time, Victor glanced toward Emma. The little girl stood beside their booth, scared, but refusing to look away. The woman in the wheelchair quietly spoke. "It's okay." Daniel turned toward her. She forced a small smile. "You don't have to do this." Daniel smiled politely. "I know." She looked confused. "Then why are you?" Daniel's answer came almost immediately. "Because one day, my daughter is going to grow up and remember mornings like this." He looked toward Emma. "I'd rather she remembers her father standing up than sitting down." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Victor rolled his neck. "I've had enough." He shoved Daniel hard in the chest. The force sent Daniel stumbling back into another table. Coffee splashed across the floor. Gasps echoed through the cafe. Emma cried out, "Dad!" Daniel caught himself against the edge of the table. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't shove Victor back. Instead, he slowly straightened his jacket. Victor laughed. "That's what I thought." Daniel calmly looked at him. "Are you finished?" Victor frowned. "You think I'm scared of you?" "No, I think you're angry." Victor stepped closer. "You don't know anything about me." Daniel nodded. "You're right. I don't, but I know enough." "Oh yeah, I know people who are winning arguments don't usually need to scream." Several customers exchanged quiet glances. Victor's face reddened. The woman lowered her eyes. She had spent years in boardrooms negotiating billion-dollar contracts. She had stared down hostile investors, outmaneuvered competitors, saved companies, yet somehow, watching a stranger calmly defend her without expecting anything in return, left her speechless. Mia hurried toward the manager. "We should call the police." "I already did." "When are they coming?" "They said they're sending someone." Victor overheard them. He laughed loudly. "Perfect." He pointed at Daniel. "You just assaulted me." The manager blinked. "What?" Victor rubbed his own shoulder theatrically. "He threatened me." Daniel couldn't help but smile. "I don't think anyone here believes that." Victor slowly turned. For the first time, he noticed something he hadn't paid attention to before. Every customer in the cafe was watching him. Not Daniel. Him. The room had shifted. An elderly veteran sitting near the window quietly stood up. I saw everything. Another customer nodded. So did I. A young mother raised her hand. I recorded it. Victor's confidence faltered. You people are serious. Nobody answered. The silence said enough. Emma suddenly walked across the cafe. Daniel immediately noticed. Emma, but she kept going. She stopped beside the woman in the wheelchair. Without saying a word, she picked up the folder that had fallen onto the floor when the wheelchair struck the table. Several pages had scattered across the tiles. Carefully, she gathered every sheet, smoothed the corners with both hands, then placed the folder gently onto the woman's lap. There, the woman looked down at the little girl. Her eyes glistened. Thank you. Emma smiled. My daddy says people should help before they're asked. Daniel looked away for a moment, not because he was embarrassed, because hearing his own words come back through his daughter's voice hit him harder than he expected. The woman rested a trembling hand over Emma's. What's your name? Emma. I'm Evelyn. Emma smiled. I like your name. Evelyn laughed softly. I like yours too. It was the first genuine smile she'd managed all morning. Then, the cafe doors opened again. Not with shouting, not with sirens, just the quiet ring of the bell overhead. A sharply dressed man in his 60s hurried inside, scanning the room with growing concern. The moment he saw the woman in the wheelchair, his face changed. He rushed toward her. Ms. Whitmore. He knelt beside her. My God, are you all right? The entire cafe exchanged puzzled looks. Ms. Whitmore. Victor's confident expression flickered for the first time, because the elderly gentleman wasn't just concerned. He looked terrified, and what he said next made the room go completely still. The board has been trying to reach you for the emergency shareholders meeting. The future of Whitmore Industries can't move forward without its chairwoman. Victor's face went white. The cafe went completely silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody even reached for their coffee. Every eye shifted between the elegant woman in the wheelchair and the silver-haired gentleman kneeling beside her. Ms. Whitmore. His voice trembled with relief. Are you hurt? Evelyn Whitmore gave him a reassuring smile. I'm all right, Charles. You don't look all right. I will be. Charles finally noticed the broken coffee mug, the scattered paperwork, Victor standing only a few feet away, Daniel beside the wheelchair. His expression hardened. What happened here? Before anyone could answer, Victor forced a nervous laugh. It's just a misunderstanding. Charles slowly stood. His eyes never left Victor. A misunderstanding. Yes, we were simply having a family disagreement. Charles glanced at Evelyn. She quietly shook her head. Just once. That was enough. The older gentleman looked back at Victor. I've worked for Ms. Whitmore for 27 years. I know exactly what a disagreement looks like. His voice became colder, and I know intimidation when I see it. Victor swallowed. You don't know the whole story. Charles took one step forward. No, but I know enough. Emma quietly tugged on Daniel's jacket. Dad? Daniel looked down. Who's Ms. Whitmore? Daniel smiled. I don't know, sweetheart. She seems important. He looked toward Evelyn. Maybe. Then he lowered his voice. But important people deserve respect for the same reason everyone else does. Emma nodded thoughtfully, not because she completely understood, but because her father had never taught her to measure people by their money. Charles turned toward Daniel. Were you the one who stepped in? Daniel shrugged. I just asked him to stop. You did more than that. Charles extended his hand. Thank you. Daniel shook it. No thanks necessary. I disagree. Charles looked at the frightened customers. Most rooms are full of people. He glanced at Daniel. Very few are full of courage. Victor scoffed. Oh, spare me. He pointed toward Evelyn. She's making herself look like a victim. Daniel frowned. No, you did that. Victor snapped his head toward him. You just don't quit. Daniel sighed. No, I just don't like bullies. Victor laughed bitterly. You don't even know who she is. Daniel looked at Evelyn, then back at Victor. You're right. I don't. And it wouldn't have changed anything. Those words made Evelyn look up. For the first time, she truly studied the man standing beside her. His jacket was faded. The soles of his boots were worn. His hands carried the rough calluses of someone used to physical work. There wasn't a watch worth mentioning on his wrist. No expensive phone. No designer clothes. Nothing suggested wealth. Yet, he had defended her without asking her name, without wondering what she could do for him, without expecting anything in return. She couldn't remember the last time that it happened. The cafe manager approached carefully. Sir, he looked at Victor. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Victor laughed. Or what? Or you'll be trespassing. Victor looked around. Seriously, you people are throwing me out. An elderly veteran folded his newspaper. No, he stood slowly. You threw yourself out the moment you laid hands on her. Several customers quietly nodded, one after another. For the first time all morning, Victor realized he had lost the room. The cafe doors opened again. This time, 2 police officers stepped inside. The younger officer looked around. We received a disturbance call. The manager immediately pointed toward Victor. That's him. Victor raised both hands dramatically. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything. Before another word could be said, the young mother who had been recording stepped forward. I have the whole thing on video. So do I, another customer added. And I saw everything, the veteran said. Within seconds, 5 different customers volunteered to be witnesses. Victor's confidence disappeared. One officer accepted the phone. He watched the recording in silence. The cafe remained perfectly still. After less than 30 seconds, he looked up. His expression had completely changed. He handed the phone back, then turned to Victor. Sir, I'm going to ask you to place your hands behind your back. Victor blinked. What? You heard me. This is insane. You can explain your side downtown. Victor pointed toward Evelyn. She's lying. The officer remained calm. The video doesn't. As the officers escorted Victor toward the exit, he suddenly twisted around. This isn't over. His eyes locked onto Evelyn. You think you've won. She met his stare without flinching. "No, I think you finally lost." The officers led him outside. The cafe door closed behind them. The room released a collective breath. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Evelyn looked toward Daniel. "I don't know how to thank you." Daniel smiled politely. "You don't have to." "I do." "You really don't." "I insist." Daniel chuckled softly. "My daughter wanted pancakes. That's all I came here for." Emma raised her hand proudly. "And hot chocolate." The room laughed. Even Evelyn. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. Charles glanced discreetly at Daniel's table. One thing immediately caught his attention. The menu was folded open to the least expensive items. Only one breakfast had been ordered. 2 empty glasses of water sat beside the single plate setting. Years of working beside Evelyn had taught him to notice details. He quietly understood. The father hadn't been choosing simplicity. He'd been choosing what he could afford. Without saying a word, Charles excused himself and walked toward the front counter. Mia looked up. "Can I help you?" Charles removed a black credit card from his wallet. "I'd like to pay for that gentleman's breakfast." He glanced toward Daniel. "And whatever else he'd like." Mia smiled. "That's kind of you." Charles shook his head. "No, it's the least we can do." Behind him, Evelyn watched Daniel, laughing with Emma, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't lingering near her table. He wasn't waiting for a reward. In fact, he seemed perfectly content to finish breakfast and quietly leave. She smiled to herself. After years of people approaching her because of her wealth, she had finally met someone who had no idea what she was worth and didn't seem to care. She looked toward Charles and said quietly, "Cancel my afternoon meetings." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You have a board meeting in 40 minutes. "I know." She kept watching Daniel and Emma. "I've just found something." She paused, a thoughtful smile crossing her face. "Far more important than another meeting." The waitress approached Daniel's table, carrying 2 large plates. Golden pancakes, fresh fruit, crispy bacon, scrambled eggs, even another mug of hot chocolate for Emma. Daniel blinked. "I think you've got the wrong table." Mia smiled. "No, it's for you." Daniel looked at the amount of food. "We only ordered pancakes." "I know. There must be some mistake." "There isn't." She glanced discreetly toward Evelyn's table. "It's already been taken care of." Daniel immediately understood. He sighed softly. He stood, picked up his wallet, and walked toward Evelyn. Charles noticed him first. "Mr. Carter." Daniel smiled politely. "I just wanted to say thank you." Evelyn smiled back. "You're welcome." But he placed 2 $20 bills on the table. "I can't accept this." Charles looked surprised. "You don't have to pay." Daniel gently pushed the money closer. "My father taught me something. If someone offers kindness, accept it. But if someone tries to carry your burdens, help carry theirs too." He smiled. "I can afford breakfast. Not much more than breakfast." He laughed quietly. "But breakfast I can manage." Emma looked at her father proudly. Evelyn studied him. "You know, most people would have accepted." Daniel shrugged. Most people probably need it. And you don't. He smiled honestly. Oh, I definitely do. That answer caught her off guard. I've got bills. My truck barely starts. My landlord's losing patience. He chuckled. So trust me. I know what struggling looks like. Then why refuse? Daniel glanced toward Emma. Because she's watching. He smiled. If she learns to expect strangers to solve our problems. I failed her. Emma nodded enthusiastically. My dad says we should earn what we have. Evelyn couldn't help smiling. Charles quietly picked up the money Daniel had placed on the table. Then perhaps allow us to thank your daughter. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Charles smiled. Breakfast wasn't charity. It was gratitude. Daniel looked at Emma. She whispered, I think he's nice. Daniel laughed. So do I. Evelyn folded her hands. Will you sit for a moment? Daniel glanced at the clock. I should probably get Emma to school. Emma immediately looked disappointed. Oh, she had been enjoying herself. Evelyn noticed. What time does school start? Daniel checked his watch. We've got 25 minutes. Then maybe. She smiled warmly. You could spare 5. Daniel looked at Emma. What do you think? She grinned. I vote yes. He laughed. 1 vote to none. He pulled out the chair. For the first time, they actually introduced themselves. I'm Evelyn Whitmore, Daniel Carter, and this young lady. Emma straightened proudly. I'm Emma. Evelyn extended her hand. It's nice to officially meet you. Emma shook it with both hands. You too. Charles quietly stepped away, giving them privacy. Meanwhile, several customers pretended not to watch. They failed miserably. The elderly veteran leaned toward the young mother. I've got a feeling this morning isn't finished. She smiled. Me too. Evelyn looked toward Daniel. What do you do for work? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. A little of everything. What does that mean? It means I was a construction foreman. The company closed. Since then, I've driven deliveries, worked warehouses, done home repairs, whatever pays. And lately, Daniel smiled awkwardly. Lately, I've been trying to convince employers that taking mornings off to get my daughter to school doesn't make me unreliable. Evelyn understood immediately. They don't like your schedule. They like my experience. They don't like that Emma comes first. Emma quietly looked down at the table. She hated hearing that. Evelyn noticed. Is that why you bring her everywhere? Daniel nodded. Her mother passed away 3 years ago. The smile slowly faded from Evelyn's face. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked at Emma, but she and I made each other a promise. Emma smiled. We're a team. Daniel nodded. No matter how hard life gets, we stay together. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Evelyn looked out the cafe window. I lost my husband 12 years ago. Daniel looked up. She smiled sadly. Heart attack. He built Whitmore Industries. I expanded it. But she rested a hand on the wheel of her chair. Success has a strange way of attracting people. Daniel listened quietly. Some come because they believe in you. Others because they believe in your bank account. Her eyes drifted toward the door Victor had been dragged through. It becomes difficult to know the difference. Daniel smiled gently. I think that's true whether you're rich or poor. Evelyn looked back at him. How so? When you're broke, you also learn who really cares. The only difference is, he shrugged, your fake friends disappear faster. Evelyn laughed. A real laugh. Not polite. Not forced. Charles looked over in surprise. He hadn't heard that laugh in months. After the laughter faded, Evelyn became thoughtful. She studied Daniel for a long moment. Then she looked at Emma. What do you want to be when you grow up? Emma answered without hesitation. A veterinarian. Daniel smiled. She's loved animals since she could walk. I want to help dogs, and horses, and birds, and even grumpy cats. Everyone laughed. Evelyn looked back at Daniel. You've raised an extraordinary little girl. Daniel smiled. I've just tried to raise a kind one. No, Evelyn said softly. You've done both. She reached into her briefcase. Charles immediately recognized the leather folder she was opening. His eyebrows rose. Surely not. Evelyn removed a simple white business card. She slid it across the table. Daniel glanced at it. His expression didn't change. Not because he wasn't impressed. Because he had never heard of Whitmore Industries. Evelyn noticed. She smiled. You don't know the company. Daniel shook his head honestly. I'm afraid I don't. Charles almost laughed. Most people would have pretended. Daniel simply admitted it. Evelyn leaned forward. I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow. Daniel looked confused. Why? I have something I'd like to discuss. What kind of something? She smiled. The kind that I don't think should be discussed in a crowded cafe. Daniel hesitated. I appreciate it, but I'm not looking for charity. Evelyn's smile widened. I know. That's exactly why I want you to come. She gently tapped the business card with one finger. I'm not offering you a handout, Mr. Carter. She paused. I'm offering you an opportunity. Daniel looked at the card again, then back at Evelyn. He had no idea that accepting that invitation would become the single most important decision of his life. The next morning, Daniel Carter stood outside the tallest building in the city. He looked up. 42 stories of glass reflected the morning sun. At the very top, silver letters stretched across the building. Whitmore Industries. Daniel adjusted the collar of the only dress shirt he owned. It had been ironed 3 times, not because it needed it, because he'd been nervous enough to iron the same sleeve twice. Emma looked up at the skyscraper. Dad, it's really tall. Daniel smiled. It sure is. She squeezed his hand. Do you think we're in the right place? He pulled the business card from his wallet. Same address, same building. I hope so. The revolving doors opened. Cool air rushed over them. The lobby looked more like a 5-star hotel than an office. Marble floors, a grand piano quietly playing in the corner, fresh flowers arranged on polished tables. Employees in tailored suits crossed the lobby with coffee cups in hand. Daniel instinctively looked down at his worn shoes. Emma noticed. She tugged gently on his hand. Dad, yeah, you told me not to compare myself to other people. Daniel smiled. I did. So, she looked around. Don't start now. Daniel couldn't help laughing. You always listen, don't you? When it's important. Behind the reception desk, a young woman smiled warmly. Good morning. Daniel stepped forward. My name is Daniel Carter. I have an appointment with Ms. Whitmore. The receptionist's smile widened. We've been expecting you. Daniel blinked. You have? She nodded. Ms. Whitmore left instructions yesterday. She picked up the phone. Mr. Carter and Miss Carter have arrived. A brief pause. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. Someone will be here in just a moment. Almost immediately, the elevator doors opened. Charles stepped out with the same calm smile Daniel remembered from the cafe. Mr. Carter. He shook Daniel's hand warmly. It's good to see you again. You too. Charles crouched slightly. And hello, Miss Emma. Emma smiled. Hi. I hear you're planning to become a veterinarian. She nodded proudly. I already have 3 stuffed animals I'm practicing on. Charles laughed. I'll make sure Ms. Whitmore hears that. The 3 stepped into a private elevator. As the doors closed, Emma looked around. This elevator is bigger than our living room. Daniel chuckled. Emma, what? Charles smiled. She's right. The elevator climbed silently. 10 floors, 20, 30, finally, 42. The doors opened onto a quiet executive floor. There were no cubicles, no crowded hallways, only wide windows overlooking the city. Sunlight poured across polished wooden floors. Employees greeted Charles respectfully as they passed. Morning, Mr. Bennett. Good morning. Everyone seemed relaxed. No one looked afraid. No one hurried nervously. Daniel noticed. Charles caught him observing. Something on your mind? Daniel nodded. People seem. He searched for the word. Happy. Charles smiled knowingly. Ms. Whitmore believes people do their best work when they're treated like human beings. Daniel quietly nodded. That explains a lot. At the end of the hallway, large wooden doors opened. Evelyn Whitmore waited beside a floor-to-ceiling window. Morning sunlight framed the skyline behind her. She smiled the moment she saw Emma. You came. Emma grinned. You invited us. I did. Charles rolled Evelyn's wheelchair closer. Coffee? Daniel smiled. Yes, please. Emma raised her hand. Hot chocolate. Evelyn laughed. I was hoping you'd ask. A few moments later, they sat around a small meeting table, not the enormous conference table dominating the office, just a simple round table by the window. It felt less like a business meeting and more like friends sharing breakfast. Evelyn looked toward Daniel. I asked you here because I wanted to know something. Daniel waited. Yesterday, you defended someone you believed was an ordinary stranger. Yes, you didn't know my name. No, you didn't know I owned this company. No, you didn't know I could ever repay you. Daniel smiled. I wasn't looking to be repaid. I know. She folded her hands. So I have one question. Daniel nodded. If another person were yelling at someone in a cafe tomorrow, would you do the same thing again? Daniel answered before she even finished. Yes. What if you knew you'd lose your job. Yes. What if the person wasn't wealthy? Yes. What if nobody thanked you? Daniel smiled. I hope nobody ever needs a reason to help someone. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. There it was, the answer she'd been hoping for. Charles quietly watched the exchange. He'd seen thousands of interviews. Executives, lawyers, consultants, people with resumes filled with impressive accomplishments. Yet somehow, this construction worker was giving better answers than all of them. Not because he'd rehearsed them, because he lived them. Evelyn reached into a folder beside her. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Daniel glanced down, his brow furrowed. This isn't. He looked up. A job application. Evelyn smiled. No, it's an employment contract. Daniel blinked. I haven't even interviewed. She tilted her head. Haven't you? Daniel looked confused. I've been interviewing you since the moment you walked into that cafe. He stared at her. Yesterday wasn't an accident. It was an interview. She shook her head. No, it became one. Daniel picked up the contract. His eyes widened. Community Outreach Director, Whitmore Industries. Annual salary, $185,000. He stopped reading. Surely, he'd misread it. He looked again. The number hadn't changed. He slowly raised his eyes. There has to be a mistake. Evelyn smiled softly. There isn't. Daniel let out a nervous laugh. I've never worked in an office. I know. I've never managed executives. I know. I don't even have a college degree. I know. Daniel looked completely overwhelmed. Then, why me? Evelyn looked out over the city for a long moment before answering. Because I can teach someone how to read financial reports. She looked back at him. I can teach someone how to lead meetings. I can teach business. She paused. But I can't teach the kind of character your daughter saw yesterday. The room fell silent. Emma looked proudly at her father. Daniel looked at the contract again, then quietly asked the question that had been weighing on him. What if I fail? Evelyn smiled. Then we'll help you learn. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Carter, I don't hire people because they already know everything. I hire them because I trust who they'll be when they don't. Daniel sat speechless. For the first time in years, someone wasn't offering him sympathy. They were offering him belief. And somehow, that felt far more valuable. Daniel stared at the contract, then at Evelyn, then back at the contract again. The number refused to change. $185,000. It was more money than he'd earned in the last 4 years. Combined, he carefully placed the papers back on the table. I'm sorry. Evelyn tilted her head. For what? I can't sign this. The room became still. Even Charles looked surprised. Evelyn folded her hands. May I ask why? Daniel nodded. You've known me for less than 24 hours. That's true. You've never seen me work. Also true. You don't know if I'm actually capable of doing this job. Evelyn smiled faintly. I know enough. Daniel slowly shook his head. No, you know who I was for 10 minutes in a cafe. He looked down at the contract. That's not enough to trust someone with a position like this. Charles watched Daniel with growing admiration. Most people would have signed before the ink dried. Daniel was trying to protect the company from making a mistake. Emma quietly looked between the adults. "Dad, yeah, you're doing that thing again." Daniel frowned. "What thing?" "The thing where someone believes in you." "But you don't." Daniel blinked. The room fell silent. Children had a remarkable talent for saying the one thing everyone else was thinking. Evelyn smiled warmly. "She's wise." Daniel laughed awkwardly. "She gets that from her mother." Emma smiled proudly. "My mom always said, being scared doesn't mean you say no. It means you ask questions." Evelyn looked at Daniel. "I think your daughter just answered for you." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I know. I'm afraid of letting people down." Evelyn nodded slowly. "There it is." Daniel looked confused. "What? The real reason?" She smiled gently. "You've spent so many years carrying everything alone. That trusting someone else's confidence feels harder than carrying your own doubts." Daniel didn't answer, because she was right. Evelyn slowly rolled her wheelchair toward the windows overlooking the city. "When my husband died, everyone assumed Whitmore Industries would collapse." She looked out across the skyline. "The newspapers called me the grieving widow. The board called me inexperienced. The investors wanted to replace me." Charles smiled quietly. "I remember." Evelyn nodded. "They all believed the wheelchair made me weaker." She rested a hand on the armrest. "They never asked whether it had made me stronger." Daniel listened carefully. "I was terrified." She smiled. "I cried in this office more times than anyone knows. But every morning, I came back." She turned toward him. "Not because I believed I couldn't fail." She paused. "Because I believed quitting guaranteed I would." Daniel looked down at the contract again. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the paper. "I don't know the first thing about corporate outreach." Evelyn laughed softly. "No, but you know the first thing about people." She reached for a tablet lying on the table, tapped the screen, then turned it toward him. The display showed security footage from the cafe. Daniel frowned. "You have surveillance video. The cafe owner shared it with me." She pressed play. The room watched in silence. There was Daniel, walking toward table 7. Calm, unhurried. There was Victor, shouting, threatening, grabbing the wheelchair. Then, the moment Daniel stepped between them, Evelyn paused the video. "Look carefully." Daniel did. "I don't understand. You never looked at me." "What?" "When you approached." She replayed the clip. Charles watched carefully. She was right. Daniel's eyes never lingered on Evelyn's expensive handbag, never on her watch, never on the briefcase. His attention stayed exactly where it belonged, on the frightened person. "You weren't calculating," Evelyn said quietly. "You weren't wondering whether helping me would benefit you." She looked him in the eye. "You saw a human being." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Daniel had no answer. Charles finally spoke. "May I tell him something?" Evelyn smiled. "Please." Charles turned toward Daniel. "I've worked beside Ms. Whitmore for 27 years. I've interviewed governors, CEOs, military generals, people with degrees from the best universities in the world. He smiled, and yesterday, I watched a construction foreman teach an entire cafe what leadership actually looks like. Daniel looked away, embarrassed. I wasn't leading anyone. Charles shook his head. That's exactly why you were. Emma suddenly raised her hand. Everyone smiled. Yes, Emma. She looked at Evelyn. If my dad works here, can he still take me to school every morning? Daniel immediately looked at Evelyn. That's actually something I need to ask. He smiled apologetically. Emma comes first. If that's a problem, I understand. Evelyn's expression softened. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into another folder, pulled out a company handbook, opened it, then slid it across the table. One paragraph was highlighted. Daniel read it aloud. Family comes first. Flexible schedules are available for parents and caregivers. He looked up. You actually do this? Evelyn smiled. We don't just write policies. We live them. Charles chuckled. Do you know why that policy exists? Daniel shook his head. Evelyn answered herself. Because years ago, someone told me I had to choose between leading this company and caring for my husband while he was dying. Her voice became quiet. I never forgot how cruel that sounded. She looked at Emma. So I promised myself, no parent working here would ever have to hear those words. Emma grinned. So Dad can still take me to school. Evelyn smiled back. Every single morning, Emma jumped from her chair and hugged her father. I told you something good was going to happen. Daniel wrapped his arms around her tightly. For a few seconds, he couldn't speak. When he finally looked back at Evelyn, his eyes were moist. I've spent 3 years looking for someone willing to hire the father. He glanced at Emma, instead of pretending she didn't exist. Evelyn nodded. Then you finally found the right company. Daniel picked up the pen resting beside the contract. His hand hovered over the signature line. Then he looked at Evelyn one last time. If I sign this, I need you to promise me one thing. Evelyn smiled. What is it? Daniel's answer surprised everyone. If I ever become the kind of person who forgets why you hired me, I want you to fire me. Evelyn smiled with unmistakable pride. She extended her hand. Mr. Carter, that's exactly why I know I never will. Monday morning, Daniel Carter arrived 30 minutes early, not because anyone had asked him to, because old habits were hard to break. He parked his aging pickup beside a row of luxury cars. For a moment, he looked at the faded paint on his truck, the dent in the passenger door, the windshield that still carried a tiny crack across one corner. Then he smiled to himself. It had carried him and Emma through some of the hardest years of their lives. He wasn't ashamed of it. Not anymore. Emma climbed out beside him. She straightened the new backpack, resting on her shoulders. Dad? Yeah, you look nervous. Daniel laughed. Do I? A little. She reached up and squeezed his hand. You always tell me that brave people get nervous too. He smiled. I really need to stop giving you advice. She giggled. No, you don't. As they entered Whitmore Industries, employees greeted Daniel with warm smiles. "Morning, Mr. Carter." "Good morning." He still wasn't used to hearing that. 3 days ago, most employers had looked at his resume and seen a problem. Now, people were greeting him as part of the team. It felt unreal. Charles met them near the elevators. "Ready?" Daniel nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Charles smiled. "That's usually the best kind." Emma looked around excitedly. "Can I see Dad's office?" Charles chuckled. "I think we can arrange that." When the elevator doors opened, Daniel stopped in his tracks. The office wasn't enormous. It wasn't covered in expensive decorations. It was simple: a wooden desk, a bookshelf, 2 comfortable chairs, large windows overlooking the city. And on the corner of the desk sat a small framed photograph. Daniel frowned. He walked closer. It was the picture someone had quietly taken in the cafe. The moment Emma had handed Evelyn the scattered papers, he stared at it. "When?" Charles smiled. "Ms. Whitmore had it printed yesterday." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Why?" Charles answered with a smile. "So you never forget why you're here." A knock sounded at the open door. Evelyn rolled inside. "Good morning." Daniel smiled. "Morning." She noticed him looking at the photograph. "I hope you don't mind." "No." He looked at Emma. "I think I like it." Emma grinned. "I look brave." "You were." Evelyn smiled. "You both were." Daniel looked around the office. "I still don't know what I'm supposed to do." Evelyn laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that." She handed him a slim folder. Inside, there wasn't a stack of reports or financial charts. There were letters, hundreds of them, handwritten, typed, printed emails, cards from employees. Daniel looked confused. "What are these?" "They're stories." He opened the first letter. A warehouse employee wrote about nearly losing his home after his wife became sick. Another described struggling to find childcare. One employee thanked the company for helping pay for a child's emergency surgery. Another admitted he was considering quitting because he couldn't balance work and caring for his elderly mother. Daniel slowly looked up. "You read all of these?" Evelyn nodded. "Every single one." She rolled closer. "Community outreach isn't about public relations. It isn't about making the company look good." She gently tapped the folder. "It's about making sure people don't become invisible." Daniel thought back to the cafe, to Evelyn sitting alone, to everyone pretending not to notice. He understood. "So," Evelyn continued, "I don't want someone who can give impressive speeches. I want someone who listens." She smiled. "Can you do that?" Daniel laughed softly. "I think so. I know you can." Just then, a hesitant knock came from the doorway. A young janitor stood there, holding a toolbox. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Come in, Miguel." The young man looked uncomfortable. I just wanted to thank you." Evelyn looked surprised. "For what?" Miguel smiled shyly. "My son starts kindergarten today." Daniel noticed tears forming in the young man's eyes. "The flexible schedule. It means I get to walk him into school." He swallowed hard. "My father never got to do that with me." The room became quiet. Miguel looked at Daniel. heard you're the reason Ms. Whitmore started talking about kindness all weekend. Daniel laughed awkwardly. I don't think that's true. Evelyn smiled. It is. After Miguel left, Daniel looked at Evelyn. You already have a great company. She shook her head. No, we're still building it. He frowned. It seems pretty successful. She nodded. It is, but success isn't measured by quarterly profits. She looked toward the hallway where Miguel had disappeared. It's measured by whether people are better off because they worked here. Daniel quietly absorbed those words. Later that afternoon, Charles walked into Daniel's office carrying a tablet. You should probably see this. Daniel looked up. What is it? The Café security video. Daniel frowned. I've already seen it. Charles smiled. Not this version. He pressed play. The footage began as before. Victor shouting, the wheelchair, Daniel stepping in. But then, the camera switched to another angle, one Daniel had never seen. It showed something that happened just before he walked over. Emma had quietly looked around the cafe, at every adult sitting there. Her little face had fallen. Then, she looked at her father, not with fear, with hope, as if she already knew. If anyone was going to stand up, it would be him. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He hadn't seen that before. Charles lowered the tablet. Children, he said softly, don't just listen to what we teach. They watch what we choose. Daniel looked through the office window toward the city, then back at the photograph on his desk. He finally understood. The greatest gift Evelyn had given him wasn't the salary, or the office, or the title. It was the chance to keep becoming the father his daughter already believed he was. As the workday came to an end, Daniel received a message from Evelyn. It contained only one sentence. Tomorrow morning, I'd like you to join me for one more meeting. There was no location, no agenda, just a time, 8:00 a.m. Daniel smiled. Somehow, he had a feeling this meeting wouldn't be about business either. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, Daniel knocked gently on Evelyn's office door. Come in. He stepped inside. Evelyn was already waiting. Not with a folder, not with contracts, not with another business proposal. She simply smiled. Good morning. Morning. She looked toward the coffee sitting on the table. I hope you don't mind. I invited someone else. Daniel looked confused. Before he could ask who, the office door opened again. Emma walked in, still wearing her school uniform. She looked just as surprised as he did. Dad, what are you doing here? She shrugged. Mr. Charles picked me up before school. Charles smiled from the hallway. I had permission. Daniel laughed. Good. I was about to ask some questions. Emma climbed onto one of the chairs. So, she looked at Evelyn. What's the meeting about? Evelyn smiled. It's about you. Emma blinked. Me and your dad. She reached into a drawer. Carefully, she removed a small wooden box. It wasn't expensive. There were no gold decorations, no company logo, just smooth oak wood with a brass latch. She placed it in front of Daniel. I'd like you to open it. Daniel slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested an old silver key, a faded photograph and a folded letter. Daniel picked up the photograph first. It showed a much younger Evelyn standing beside a smiling man in front of a tiny warehouse. The building looked nothing like the skyscraper they now occupied. Only 6 employees stood behind them. Everyone looked exhausted, but happy. "My husband," Evelyn said quietly. "Thomas." She smiled at the picture. "We started Whitmore Industries in a warehouse smaller than this office." Daniel studied the photograph. "They look proud." "We were." She laughed softly. "We couldn't even afford matching office chairs." Daniel unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat. Careful. He read the first line aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to remind you why we built this company." Daniel looked up. Evelyn nodded. "Keep reading. Never build a business that only makes money. Build one that makes people believe tomorrow can be better than today." Daniel paused. The room had become completely still. He continued, "The day our employees become numbers instead of names, we've already failed." He slowly lowered the letter. "Your husband wrote this." Evelyn nodded. "The night before he passed away." She looked out the window. "For years, I thought honoring him meant growing the company." She smiled sadly. "So I worked harder. We expanded. We broke records. We opened offices across the country." She glanced back at Daniel. "But somewhere along the way, I became so busy protecting the company that I almost forgot why we started it." Daniel quietly placed the letter back into the box. "The cafe." Evelyn smiled. "Yes, the cafe reminded me." She looked directly at him. "I watched a father with almost nothing risk the little he had for someone who could offer him nothing in return." She paused, and I realized that's exactly the kind of person Thomas would have hired. Emma looked at the old photograph. "Was he nice?" Evelyn smiled warmly. "He was. He used to tell me something." "What?" She looked at Emma. "When you find someone with a good heart, don't just thank them. Give them a place where that heart can make a difference." Emma thought about those words. "I like him." "So did I." Evelyn reached into the wooden box one last time. She lifted out the silver key. Daniel frowned. "What's that for?" "It opened the front door of our first warehouse." She turned it over in her hand. "For 35 years, I've kept it as a reminder of where we began." She smiled. "I'd like you to have it." Daniel immediately shook his head. "I can't take that." "I think you should." "No, it belongs to your family." Evelyn's eyes softened. "It does." She gently placed the key into Daniel's palm. "And today, so do you." Daniel stared at the old key. It wasn't worth much, not in money, but he understood what it meant. It wasn't a gift. It was trust. Just then, Charles stepped forward carrying a tablet. "There's one more thing." He tapped the screen. A video filled the display. It wasn't from the cafe. It was from the company's internal network. Hundreds of employees appeared one after another. Warehouse workers, receptionists, engineers, drivers, janitors, managers. Each one shared a single sentence. "Thank you for reminding us why kindness matters. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for showing our children what courage looks like. Thank you for reminding us that character comes before titles. Daniel watched in stunned silence. I don't understand. Charles smiled. They all saw the cafe footage. The story spread through the company, and something unexpected happened. What? People started helping each other. The screen continued. One employee spoke about reconciling with a coworker after months of resentment. Another had volunteered at a homeless shelter for the first time. A manager admitted he had apologized to his team after realizing he'd been leading through pressure instead of respect. Another employee smiled as she explained that she had finally asked a struggling coworker if he needed help instead of assuming he was fine. None of it had been required. No corporate memo, no incentive, just people choosing to do better. Daniel slowly looked at Evelyn. You didn't change my life. She smiled knowingly. No, he shook his head. You gave me a job, but you changed hundreds of lives. Evelyn smiled. I think. She looked toward the employees on the screen. You did that. Charles checked his watch. Miss Emma, we should get you to school. Emma hopped off her chair. Before leaving, she ran over and hugged Evelyn. Thank you. Evelyn hugged her back. For what? For believing in my dad before he believed in himself. Daniel looked away for a moment. His daughter had a way of saying exactly what was in his heart. Later that afternoon, Daniel picked Emma up from school. As they drove home in the same old pickup truck, she looked out the window. Dad? Yeah. Are we rich now? Daniel laughed. What do you think? She thought for a moment, then smiled. I think we were rich yesterday too. Daniel glanced at her. Why's that? She looked back at him with the same quiet certainty she'd carried all along. Because we already had the things that mattered. Daniel reached across the seat and squeezed her hand. I think your mom would be proud of you. Emma smiled. I hope so. The pickup disappeared down a quiet country road. It wasn't a luxury car. The house waiting for them wasn't a mansion. But for the first time in years, Daniel wasn't driving toward uncertainty. He was driving toward a future built not on luck, but on one simple decision. A decision to help a stranger, not because she was wealthy, not because she could repay him, but because it was the right thing to do. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the first chapter of someone else's miracle.